Hello, everybody. Today we'll discuss the first part of the grammar of lesson 27. Text, sentence, and clause. The sentence itself, though in a sense complete, is often obscure in the absence of any context. The wholeness of a sentence is at best a grammatical independence with certain reservations and a more or less vague meaning cohering in this grammatical complex. The actual textual units of the Digha Nikaya are its 34 suttantas, dialogues, or pariyayas, discourses, which are independent in their contexts, though interlocking as regards the Buddhist doctrines enunciated, to the exposition of which all the arguments and narratives tend, and having many passages in common. These are of varying length, the longer ones being subdivided into chapters, bharnavadas, as convenient portions for the reading at a stretch. A bharnavada is said to contain 8,000 syllables. Each suttanta begins with the statement Evang me sutang, which is traditionally ascribed to Ananda as the first reciter of the Nikayas, when they were compiled orally at first after the Parinibbana. This is followed by an introductory narrative, Nidana, Ekang Sangayang, giving the situation by a dialogue, Sutta. The main dialogue usually develops from a leading question, Panya or Pucha. The elaborate exposition, Nidesa, of a question of doctrine is a unit of discourses intermediate between the suttanta and the sentence, which is prominent in the traditional exegesis of Pali texts. Sometimes we can distinguish sections of text intermediate in length between the Nidesa and the sentence, marked by the uniformity of tenses, for example, the historical present and other elements. These sections are usually much longer than the conventional modern paragraph and may run to as much as 10 pages. In Pali, a sentence can be of the length of a paragraph as the traditional punctuation is light, somewhat fluid, and not highly articulated. There's simply a half stop and a full stop. Modern editors have often disregarded it and introduced conventions of their own. The punctuation is thus not decisive in determining sentences, and grammatical considerations override it. A sentence, Vakya, is a group of words, Padasamuha, which is unified in meaning, Atta Sambatta, and of limited extent, Padesa Padiyosana. This is a quote from Agavamsa. The meaning intended here is primarily grammatical meaning. The words in which sentence apprehend one another syntactically, the full grammatical explanation of one word relates it to other words, and all those words which are thus interlocked constitute one sentence. The object of adding of limited extent is presumably to indicate that we should distinguish a sentence the smallest units, which can be separated without breaking any syntactic connection, disregarding the looser connections with the wider context. The simple sentence is unified by grammatical relations and concord, for example, between a verb and its agent, and nouns in other cases relating to the action, between nouns by the genitive case relation, or by compounding, between nouns and attributes by concord of case, sometimes gender and number, etc. It may be affirmative or negative, interrogative, etc., as shown by indeclinables. A sentence may have a verb or be nominal. It may also have more than one verb, for example, a string of verbs grammatically parallel to one another. Complex sentences. More complex sentences may be organized in a number of ways. 7 main elements of period constructions can perhaps be distinguished as follows. First, conjunction, connection by conjunctive indeclinables, lesson 17. Paratax, connection by the anaphoric pronoun, lesson 5. This would be ta or tat, which points back to something which has been introduced before. 3. Subordination or hypotext, connection of a relative clause or a bound clause to a main clause or a free clause by a relative pronoun or indeclinable, lesson 12. 4. Compounding. A compound, especially a Bahubihi, equivalent to a subordinate clause. Lesson 19. 5. The infinite verb participles, including absolute constructions such as the genitive absolute and the locative absolute. The gerund and the infinitive may be used to connect a subordinate action to the main action. Lesson 8, 10, 16, and 19. 6. Direct speech, concluded by the indeclinable marker T, sometimes iti, lesson 6. 7. Chaining, by a repeated word. All these elements can be repeated and combined with the exception of subordination and chaining. The relative clause, also known as adjectival clause because it qualifies the subject or the verb of the sentence, specifying who or what it is we are talking about. So a relative clause is the regular form of subordinate clause. Clauses with particles, participles, and gerunds are also freely used, but this is not the same kind of subordination. Its use is extremely frequent or most frequent and most important. It is also the most complex and varied in structure and meaning and requires careful study. The clear articulation of a sentence into a subordinate clause introduced by a relative word, for example, a relative pronoun or an relative indeclinable, such as yatta, where, and the main clause introduced by a demonstrative word is an outstanding characteristic of Pali. Complex sentences may be built up by combinations of relative plus demonstrative clauses, coordinate clauses joined by connective particles such as cha, direct speech, and so on. Regularly precedes, so the relative clause regularly precedes the main clause as the qualifier comes before the qualified. A relative pronoun introduces the clause but may be preceded by indeclinables connecting the whole sentence to the narrative of which it forms a part. For example, attako ye ichingso te akangso. Then indeed, those who wished worked, literally, who wished they worked. If the antecedent is a noun, it is placed in the relative clause. The relative pronoun is in the same number and gender as the noun or the demonstrative pronoun it refers to, but it may be in any case. That is to say, a relative and correlative agree with the antecedent in gender and number, connecting it with the words in its own relative clause or sentence. For example, Yene tvarene nikkami, tamt gotama tvarang nama ahosi. The gate by which he left was called Gotama Gate, or literally, by which gate he left that Gotama Gate named was. The case, however, agrees with the function of the antecedent in each clause. Besides demonstrative pronouns, other pronouns may serve as correlatives. For example, personal pronouns plus also the pronominal adjective sabba, all. Ye ahesung sabbe pakesi. Those who were there, he devoured them all. Yam purisang attasang so jotipalo tibuchati. The man who I saw, he is called Jotipala. The antecedent purisang is here purisang in this sentence. Yang anitchang tang dukkang, what is impermanent, that is suffering, or perhaps more broader, unsatisfactory. No antecedent, with the correlative taking the role of the antecedent. That which is impermanent is suffering or unsatisfactory. Ye bhagavantam passanti te na paridevanti. They who see the Blessed One do not lament. No noun agreeing with the pronouns Then the demonstrative takes the place of the antecedent. Sometimes the main clause has no correlative word. This may, of course, depend on its having a special form, such as direct speech, but as a rule, the correlative demonstrative is used. The pronouns in each clause take their case based on the function that the antecedent plays in that clause. Yo raja nipachati tam uchanti. The king who sleeps, him they ask. So meaning they ask the king who sleeps. Proper names with title in the main clause is quite often used without demonstrative. Repetition of a relative pronoun emphasizes that the clause is universal or general. Yo, whoever. The correlative is also repeated. For example, yo adi yisati tasse anupattasami. Whoever will take, to him I will grant. Yata, tata, in whatever way, in that way. A demonstrative pronoun immediately following a relative pronoun is emphatic. Yo so, he who, that which. A more complex sentence with emphatic and correlative demonstratives. Yo so sato patamang upappanno tasse evang hoti ahang asmi brahma. That being who has come into existence first in the evolution of the universe thinks he is God. Literally, who that being first is reborn has this thought. Of him there is thus, I am God or I am Brahma. Okay. Then we have a few words to discuss. Anjati, term meaning on a lathe. Just to give you an example what a lathe looks like, because it wasn't entirely clear to me either. Where you can put something in and then turn it and then work with it. Anurakati, look after or retain. Abujati, fold the legs. Asevati, to practice. Upadhyati, to be attached. Nichareti, bring up. Niyadeti, hand over, give, in charge of. Nivatati, go back. Paganhati, apply. Pati Pachavamati, to swallow back. Padahati, exert. Paluchati, decay. Pasambati, become calm, and the causative of which, pasambeti, make calm. Pasasati, so we have learned asasati, to breathe in, and pasasati, breathe out. Pivati, to drink, and its aorist is apai, drunk. Bahulikaroti, cultivate. Bhayati, and its aorist bhayi, be afraid. Yachati, request or ask for, but not ask a question. So ask for something. Ayam vayamati, exercise or practice. Atto, next to wealth and prosperity and meaning and so on. It means also matter or affair. Analayo, not clinging. Antevasin, apprentice. Ayanam, way or path. Avyapado, non-violence. Asamoso, not forgetting. Agabanang, coming, as an action noun of agachati. Ajivo, ajivo, livelihood. Udachang, pride or vanity. Udachakakuchang, pride, vanity, conceit. Ukuchang, vanity, worry, and anxiety. However, I wasn't entirely satisfied with this. Udachakakucha. So I marked this as something like a restlessness and worry. I felt more in tune with this translation. Garnang or Garnang, nose. Chago, abandoning. Jibha, tongue. Nayo, method. Tinang, mental deficiency, stupidity, inertia. Tina mittang, stupidity or inertia. Again, I wasn't entirely on board with this, and I rather translate Tina mittang as sloth and torpor. Nisidanang, a seat, a cloth or ground sheet for sitting on the ground. Parinisakko, rejecting or renouncing. Particity or particity, recollectedness or mindfulness. Paloko, decay. Palanko, sitting cross-legged. Okay, today up to here. Punadasanaya, Tababavaya, Subham Mangalam.